Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jasmine Nolan Eccles. I am the chair of the Charter Commission. On today, we're going to begin our agenda with Secretary Bobo completing a roll call of all present commissioners.
Yes, when I mention your name, please do say I am, or I'm here, or I'm present. So beginning with Chair Nolan Eccles.
Aye.
Commissioner Vice Chair Sheridan. Commissioner Crossland.
Present.
Commissioner Dwight. Commissioner Garth. Commissioner Grant.
Present.
Commissioner Intagliata.
Present.
Commissioner Riley. And Commissioner Bobo, I am also present. And now I will read off our ex officio members as well. The Honorable Darlene Green. The Honorable Joseph Vollmer. Director Christine Ingracia.
Present.
CD Counselor Sheena Hamilton.
Present.
Director Sonia Gray.
Present.
Thank you. And Mr. Jake Hummel. Okay, that concludes the roll for today.
Do we have a quorum?
Let's see. Yes.
Okay, we have a quorum. Therefore, we're going to proceed with the second item on the agenda, which is a presentation from our city government overview, where Commissioner Casey Milberg, Policy Director, and Commissioner Christine, I get her last name wrong all the time, is going to do a presentation for us related to any city government overview concepts that we need to understand as a commission prior to the work that we are planning to do. You guys can take over at this point.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you so much, Madam Chair, for that introduction. Yes, as you can see on the screen, as we are going to be presenting, there will be informational slides that can be viewed for every topic that we are discussing. Once again, my name is Casey Milberg. I currently serve as the ex officio member representing the Mayor's Office on the Charter Commission. I currently serve as the Policy Director in the Mayor's Office. As a little bit of context for the public, though the commission members are aware of this, the ordinance and the ballot initiative establishing this commission tasked the ex officio members with serving on the commission for the purpose of helping provide context on their current city government matters or other areas of operation that pertain to their areas of expertise, to help advise the commission and educate the commission on the context of city government as it pertains to what the charter says. And today, two of us, myself and the Board of Aldermen ex officio designee, Christine Ingracia, will be upholding that duty by providing a very high level presentation on what the current charter for the city of St. Louis says about the structure of city government, the checks on certain city government operations that are within the charter. And really the purpose of this is because the commission continues its work to understand what the current charter says and opportunities to improve it. It was really flagged that this kind of presentation would be helpful, informative, and support that work. The goal is hopefully to provide this commission and the public with a structural understanding of how the city charter currently shapes the functions of city government. So that's the hope and the outcome. Christine Ingracia, Commissioner Ingracia, and I will be tag teaming the various topics throughout the presentation today. To uphold the format of the special meeting on Tuesday, we'll be proceeding through the presentation and reserving some time at the end for questions from commissioners and questions from the public. And as a final note before getting started, I do want to thank the staff from the City Councilor's Office for helping put together such a very detailed presentation. So thank you to all of you for your work on that. So if we want to go ahead and get started, we'll get started with the presentation. As it says, there's a lot of moving parts. This isn't going to go into nitty-gritty detail on everything. It's supposed to be high level, structural. Okay, what are the engines? What are the gears? How is our government set up? As well as how does the charter both grant and limit power to the different operational features of state government? Next slide. And so here's an overview of the roadmap of what you can expect today. We're going to go on a focus on the principal public officers and bodies under the charter. This includes the mayor, the board of aldermen, the comptroller, the board of estimate and apportionment, the law department, the department of personnel, the board of public service. We're going to delve briefly into what are considered the general government offices and departments and agencies. And then we'll also close out with a review of the airport, the county offices, and the St. Louis Development Corporation, which have some different roles in city government than the more traditional departments and agencies. Next slide. Starting with the mayor, what the charter says about the mayor is that the mayor shall be, quote, the chief executive officer of the city and shall have and exercise all the executive power of the city and shall exercise a general supervision over all the executive affairs of the city and see that each officer and employee performs his duty and that the laws are enforced. Next slide. And so a little bit more detail about what that executive power is and how it's checked. The mayor has currently the power to appoint the following officers at, it says his, so a bit of updating might be appropriate given who the current mayor is at their convenience. And this includes the assessor, supply commissioner, the register, city councilor, city marshal, city court judges, the city court clerk, the president of the Board of Public Service, the director of public utilities, the director of streets, director of human services, director of parks, recreation, forestry, the director of health and hospitals, and the director of public safety. So appointing a lot of those departmental and agency heads. And then in terms of how the power of the mayor is, here we go, how the power of the mayor is checked. The charter currently provides that the mayor's power is checked by the mayor having to, quote, hold for the term for which they were elected until their successors qualify. What that means is directors, once appointed, serve for the duration of the mayor's term and may be removed for cause. And then, of course, the mayor can be not, reelected or elected as the voters see fit. Next slide. A bit more detail, the mayor gets to, under the charter, appoint and remove all non-elected officers and employees. It provides that questions between officers about what their powers are and duties, that's determined by the mayor, except as the charter otherwise provides. So if the charter doesn't explicitly state what someone's duty or office is, and that's determined by the mayor. The mayor also has the power to examine what's going on with the departments and require them to produce accounts and papers and make reports available to them. So that's a bit of an oversight provision. More checking powers on the mayor's office. Again, it says, except as otherwise in this charter provided. And that phrase really serves as a bit of a check where the mayor does not have unfettered power. The charter does specify when the charter speaks, the mayor can't unilaterally override that. The mayor is not able to remove any office, department, or division head appointed to them except by demonstrating cause. And the charter further says that there's broad authority that the mayor has over the charter says that there's broad authority over personnel matters that also exist outside of the mayor through the Civil Service Commission, as well as through the personnel director. So another check on the power over employees in our city charter. And historically, certain services performed by certain city employees are now performed under professional service contracts with private entities. And those checks exist with the comptroller, as well as with the Board of President's Office and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment process to provide a little bit of oversight there. And next slide, and I will kick it over to former Alderwoman, current Commissioner Ingracia. Still not quite used to that.
Thanks so much, Director Milberg, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to kind of start to figure out the structure of city government. I'm going to dive into the Board of Aldermen. If we could move to the next slide.
And I apologize, I forgot to review the last slide quickly. Just high level notes there. I'm so sorry about that. The mayor gets to perform all the executive power of the city and have general supervision. And again, the comptroller exercises fiscal checks, and there are fiscal checks with a 3-member board of estimate and apportionment. And then there's some high level detail in case commission members are interested. Current mayor's office budget is $2.6 million, and there are 19 employees. And now I will kick it over to you, Commissioner Ingracia.
Thank you so much. So obviously the Board of Aldermen is the legislative making body in the city of St. Louis. Just a quick bit of history, just for points of interest. The city initially had 5 trustees in the very beginning, and then the 1914 charter adopted the 28 aldermen that we had until voters changed the charter in 2012 to move effective in 2023 to 14 aldermen, with the president being elected citywide as the 15th and the leader of the legislative body. The Board of Aldermen does have some checks and balances that fall underneath it. Obviously, when we pass board bills, we send those off to the mayor, and those can be vetoed either in their entirety or also by line. If it's helpful information, I will say I've seen board bills vetoed by the mayor before under all 3 of the mayors I've served under. I've never seen a line item veto in the 10 years I've been here, but I would assume it's happened before. Our ordinances also, if there's any fiscal implications, you can move to the next slide, I apologize. If there are fiscal implications, then before legislation is finally passed, which we call third reading, it does have to go to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. The Board of Aldermen is not allowed to move forward any bills that have fiscal notes or again, financial implications without that check and balance as well. And the next slide discusses the fact that we do have limitations on what we are allowed to move forward in terms of fines for violations. That is something that has been a point of contention, as many of you know, a $500, $1,000 fine because it hasn't been looked at in a long time or changed may have meant a lot in 100 years ago, maybe not so much anymore. And then lastly, we do have a check and balance here at the board on selling or leasing property. The Board of Public Service, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and sometimes the comptroller's office is key in making sure that there's a check there in terms of getting rid of public property, especially the water department. And I am actually not 100% sure what the charitable purpose appropriation means in terms of subject to the administration or supervision of the city. So if anybody has questions about that, I will have to dig into that further. And next slide, moving on to the comptroller's office. The comptroller's office is part of the comptroller herself, the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. So it's the mayor, the president of the Board of Aldermen, and the comptroller. The Darlene Green is the head of basically our financial division in the city of St. Louis, oversees many of its fiscal departments, property and assets as well. Next slide. So under Article 15 discusses the fact that the comptroller should be the general accountant and auditor for the city. And so that also has implications for the credit of the city. Sometimes you'll see stories in the news about, we just recently, 5 days ago, had an increase in the credit rating of the city of St. Louis. The comptroller also ensures that no contract liability is incurred without previous authority of law or ordinance. So that's a check there in the comptroller's office back to the Board of Aldermen. Next slide. The comptroller's office is in charge of payroll in the city. and basically any sort of fiscal implication for any accounts that have to have any contract that gets signed that has fiscal implications. All of those pieces move through the comptroller's office at some point before they're able to be finalized. Next slide. The supply division is underneath the comptroller's office. So that's, many of the pieces that help City Hall move on a regular basis in terms of the printing department, any sort of office supplies we need, larger acquisitions of furniture, facilities also is a part of that. And then discusses the fact that the estimate and apportionment also will, along with the comptroller, certain some of the
I don't know if we lost Commissioner Ingracia. Okay, what I will do, it looks like we may have lost Commissioner Ingracia, so I'll pick up where she left off and we'll move on to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, and we'll see if we can get her back in the presentation. So the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, this previously came up in the discussion of the Mayor's Office. This is a 3-member board comprised of the Mayor, Comptroller, and Board President, and that is specifically provided for under the current charter. Next slide. And the board, so the city has a budget division that reports directly to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. The budget division has 5 employees and a budget of $540,000. Some big picture information about the fiscal process in general in the city. Our fiscal year runs from July 1st through June 30th, which is fairly common for government fiscal years. The federal government's fiscal year is slightly different, beginning in October. And so the budget process really kicks off in December of each year with a revenue forecast that the budget division produces for the upcoming fiscal year. By way of example, this December, the budget division will produce a revenue forecast for fiscal year 25. And then in February, the city departments have to submit their budget request to the director of the budget division. And then the director of the budget division begins reviewing those requests and considering them in the broader context of the revenue projections. Next slide. Perfect. And so the role of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, very fiscal oriented, of course. The Board of Estimate and Apportionment is tasked with recommending a balanced budget under the charter to the Board of Aldermen 60 days before the start of a new fiscal year. So again, 2 months before July 1st of every year is the deadline ENA has to hit. The charter provides that the Board of Aldermen is able to decrease but not increase any recommended appropriation amount. However, the board is able to recommend changes to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment that they think should be considered, and then any changes have to be agreed upon both by the Board of ENA as well as the Board of Aldermen. If there are in a situation where there are no recommended, if there are recommended changes that cannot be agreed upon before the start of the fiscal year, July 1st, then the original budget presented by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to the Board of Aldermen then becomes the official city budget. And again, this is all spelled out in the charter. And then, of course, Estimate and Apportionment also oversees certain finances, and how that plays out is even following the budget cycle, further appropriations will come through the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. And the rules that any ordinances that make change or transfer an appropriation or contemplate or involve the expenditure or payment of money, they must be recommended for that purpose of expenditure by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. And so no ordinance can be adopted that tries to spend money unless the Board of Estimate and Apportionment has first approved of that. And then we have sections 5 and 6 of Article 16, which also charge the Board of Estimate and Apportionment with performing a bit of a fiscal check role in determining whether certain funds that the city has, so there's the general fund that houses general revenue, and then there are a lot of other funds across city government that house different kinds of revenue that come from different revenue streams. So that section of the charter charges ENA with determining whether a particular fund does in fact have money available for what are referred to as supplemental appropriations. So the original appropriation is the operating budget for the board bill, and then anything on top of and in addition to that is considered a supplemental appropriation. And then that section of the charter also charges ENA with determining whether the appropriation is for a lawful purpose. Next slide. Let's see, and then we have the law department. I'm going to kick it over to Commissioner Ingracia. Were you able to get back on?
Yeah, sorry about that. I've been bumped off a couple times. So if I start to freeze again, I'm just going to go off video. The city councilor's office is, powers are enumerated under Article 10 in the city charter, and directs the management of all litigation in which the city is a party. Also deals with anything transactional, claims, contracts, problem properties. The city councilor's office does advise the board of aldermen or the committees that make up the board of aldermen on any sorts of issues or legal questions affecting the city's interests. So there's a lot of interaction there with respect to ideas that aldermen might have in terms of board bills that they would like to have introduced, or what might happen subsequent to bills being passed and turning into law. Also, as I mentioned, approves form for contracts, deeds, and bonds. So there's a lot of interaction with the selection committees that we have for procurement and making sure that everything is done according to best practices. And then lastly, does advise the police department. So there is a unit underneath the city councilor's office that works directly with the police department. It's about 83 employees, over 50 attorneys with over 20 support staff, and a budget of $15.6 million. And civil service is up next. So Commissioner Milberg is up.
Perfect, thank you. So the Civil Service Commission, the Personnel Director, those are interconnected processes, and they oversee, quote, pursuant to the charter, they're charged with overseeing, pursuant to the charter, a modern and comprehensive system of personnel administration for the city, whereby economy and effectiveness in the personal services rendered to the city and fairness and equity to the employees and the taxpayers of the city alike may be promoted. So there's a pretty broad charge there. The power of the Civil Service Commission is to, there's a few different powers. So the power of the Civil Service Commission is, looking at certifying individuals, for the position of directors, as well as recommending to the mayor and alders ordinances providing for compensation of employees, holidays, the time of work, attendance requirements, anything that you could think of as sort of in a more like human resources oriented nature. That's the easiest way to think about some of what's the purview of the Civil Service Commission, and ordinances and whatnot that really try to regulate, those items have to start with the Civil Service Commission and the Personnel Director. In terms of checks on that power, the Civil Service Commission is appointed by the mayor, and the mayor is able to remove members of the commission only for certain instances, which include nonfeasance, malfeasance, or misfeasance in office, and that is only after a public hearing. And in terms of the membership makeup, it's 3 members appointed to serve 2 to 6 year terms. And then there's some additional powers that are provided for. So Civil Service Commission is also tasked with prescribing and amending from time to time rules for the administration and enforcement for the provisions of, quote, this article. Again, the article is what governs, the compensation, hours of work, things like that for our employees. The Civil Service Commission is also vested with the power to consider and determine any matter, pretty broad, involved in the administration and enforcement of those more HR employee personnel matters, as well as rules and ordinances that are adopted. And so again, that harkens back to, if there is an ordinance that's going to address any of this, then it really has to start with Personnel Division and the Civil Service Commission. The charter also provides that the Civil Service Commission is able to order any employee the reinstatement of any employee who has been discharged or demoted or reduced in rank or compensation for religious, racial, or political reasons. So that's one of those good governance checks to make sure that, if there is a bad actor within city government, that there's a check that exists currently to counter that. And then in terms of other checks, specifically those provided on the Civil Service Commission, the commission doesn't have any outside of the powers that it's specifically given, doesn't have any administrative powers or duties. It's very limited to what the charter says its powers are. It also doesn't have, except as otherwise provided in the relevant article, it doesn't have the power to direct or control the actions, requirements, duties of any employee of the Department of Personnel or any other employee in the city, or action that they have to take. So in other words, it can't really get into the nitty gritty, day-to-day details of what an employee's life is or duties are for the city. It leaves that up to the discretion and the direction of their supervisors at the city. And then another check is neither the Civil Service Commission or its members have the power to take any action except by majority vote in meetings, which is a pretty standard threshold. And then, of course, moving on to the Personnel Director, which is, again, coexists along with the Civil Service Commission. The Director of Personnel is the head and secretary of the Civil Service Commission. So there's an interconnectedness specifically built into the charter there. The Personnel Director has very broad authority over how to classify employees, how they're compensated, their service rating, and how promotions are handled within city government. And they're also, the director is also charged to make investigations regarding enforcement and effective personnel provisions. So for example, if there's a suspicion that an employee is not being treated correctly, they're empowered to investigate that. Things of that nature. And then looking at how the Personnel Director's powers are currently checked or limited under the charter. Again, it's, except as such powers are specifically provided in, the Civil Service Commission. There's also the mayor has a little bit of a check on that power, and that they appoint the Personnel Director from a list of what are called eligibles. Those eligibles are determined by the Civil Service Commission. So there's a little bit of outside recommendation to the mayor, and then the mayor has to pick from that pool. And then the Personnel Director can currently only be removed for office on charges of nonfeasance, malfeasance, or misfeasance in office, and as well after a public hearing. So very similar to what we saw with the Civil Service Commission. And then additional information specifically over their personnel power. The Personnel Director does have powers and duties that extend to all other further things necessary and proper for making effective the provisions of civil service and its rules. Even in the absence of rules that are applicable, the director has the power to take action that may be necessary to effectuate the purposes thereof. So again, the position has pretty broad, what we might think of as, in the private sector, sort of an HR department sort of power to really regulate and monitor and enforce and investigate provisions relating to the employment of city employees. Additional powers are to aid the mayor and aldermen in appointing authorities and handling their personnel matters related to positions under their jurisdiction. From a boots on the ground perspective, sometimes what that looks like is helping tailor, a job description or figuring out, okay, what are your guys' needs, and how can that position best be classified or compensated. Their powers currently checked again by, except as such powers and duties are specifically vested in the Civil Service Commission by this article, so no double dipping there. And then let's see, I think we've already reviewed those. They have 54 employees currently within the personnel division and a budget of $112 million. And it's important to note that includes management of benefits and pensions for employees as well. And then I'm going to kick it over to Commissioner Ingracia for the discussion of the Board of Public Service.
Thank you. So Article 13 in the Charter creates the Board of Public Service, which is overseen by a president who's required to be an engineer, and then includes 6 directors, which lead city departments. So that's the Director of Public Utilities. Public utilities in the city of St. Louis are made up of our water division and communications, which is our local government access channel, STLTV, who is helping us out today and is critical in making sure that the community is able to access a wide variety of the services that the city of St. Louis is offering. The Director of Streets, Director of Human Services, the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, the Director of Health and Hospitals. It's another bit of language that's a bit dated when the city of St. Louis used to have hospitals that were in operation. So effectively, it's the Department of Health at this point, and then the Director of Public Safety. The Board of Public Service oversees most of any public works improvements on St. Louis City owned property or in projects which the city might have an interest. The Board of Public Service also oversees board capital funds, which are given each year to be spent at the discretion of each elected official, broken down by ward currently, for anything from parks improvements, lighting, streets, paving, dumpsters, you name it. If it's on city property, it's probably being overseen by the Board of Public Service. Next slide. Just do a quick overview of the member departments of the Board of Public Service. So we have the Department of Streets, which is currently led by Bethany Williams. They deal with sorry, I skipped a slide. So this is the list of the Public Safety Department who oversees quite a few things. So the head of the Public Safety is currently an interim, Charles Coyle, and the Public Safety is the largest city department and makes up a whopping $402 million of our budget. Next slide is Department of Streets, which is overseen by Bethany Williams currently, undertakes most of what you would anticipate. The list is included here. Public Utilities, which is Kurt Scobie, and he oversees the Water Division and Communications. It does list here that the Water Division is an enterprise fund. We have two enterprise funds here in the city of St. Louis, the Water Division and the airport. Basically what that means is that the cost of operating that department is recovered primarily through use charges. Next slide. Department of Parks, Rec, and Forestry is led by Greg Hayes currently. So that's any maintenance or permitting use in any city park, tree planting, maintenance of street trees. Those are all the tree lawns or trees in any city-owned property, including parks, recreation centers, camps, Operation Brightside, and Soulard Market. Next slide. Department of Health and Hospitals is currently led by Dr. Mahdi. Next slide. Human Services is led by Adam Pearson currently, oversees the list of units here. And that is the makeup of the Board of Public Service. Commissioner Miller, you're up.
Sure. I'm going to go into a little bit more of the general government agencies and offices. And so when we say general government, these tend to have a bit of a broader focus in terms of more mission than necessarily one specific wheelhouse. So we have our Office of Planning and Urban Design. So, thinking through, how do we think about zoning to how do we think about expanding transit, within our city. That's something that's typically handled at Planning and Urban Design. They also handle, some more specific nitty-gritty questions. I know, for example, there's been the rollout of, medicinal and recreational dispensaries and related facilities, and so a lot of those have to clear through the Planning and Urban Design process as well. They handle a lot, as they also have an increasing focus on climate and sustainability matters as well. The Affordable Housing Commission in the city of St. Louis also provides for affordable housing facilities in the city for residents who need access to that. SLATE stands for the St. Louis Agency on Training and Employment. Their mission is to provide job training opportunities, resources, placement, internships, not just to adults, but also to youth. They have an increasingly youth-focused mission. They do fantastic work on that front, partnerships. CDA stands for the Community Development Administration. CDA serves as the recipient and manager of a lot of our federal funding that we receive. They disperse a lot of grants Individuals and entities in the community apply on a regular basis for funding that is made available through CDA. So they are, the easiest way to think about them is a giant collector and distributor of funding, both from the federal government, as well as funding that the city chooses to allocate to them as well. And then CREA stands for the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. So anything that's considered, a civil right, whether it's, discrimination, prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race or disability or, anything in that wheelhouse, CREA receives complaints and can look into matters and field those as well. Next slide. Lambert, while not located physically within the city, is operated by the City of St. Louis, as well as the Airport Commission. Airport revenues, which result mostly from payments that airlines make to the city for using the airport to manage their flights and facilitate flights. It also includes things like parking fees and any interest that are earned on fees. Airport revenues are specifically limited to the purposes of the airport. And let's see, it looks like there's 519 employees and a budget of $519 million for the airport. And then, of course, we have the city-funded judicial offices. So we have city municipal courts. It is a branch of city government. They are tasked with enforcing city ordinances. So that's their purview. The circuit court, by way of contrast, is the clearinghouse for state offenses, city court, city ordinances. And the city also funds other apparatuses of the justice system, including the circuit attorney office, the city sheriff office, the state circuit court, the state juvenile court, the state drug court, as well as the public administrator, which can be appointed to serve as the conservator or the representative or guardian for individuals living with disabilities or for individuals who have no family and who survive that family. And the judicial offices collectively have about 651 employees and a budget of $68.5 million in the city budget for fiscal year 24. We also have the county offices, and this is one of the comments that was raised at I believe the first commission meeting is what's a county office. And so this is a listing of all the offices that are considered county offices. So it's our city treasurer, and they provide our banking, investment, parking, and financial empowerment services and financial education services as well. We have the recorder of deeds. The recorder of deeds handles records and certificates relating to birth, death, land, marriage, and some archival records as well. We have our board of election commissioners, and they're responsible for the maintenance and conducting public elections within the city. They're also responsible for voter registration and maintenance and safeguarding of those records. We also have the tax equalization board. The tax equalization board has the power to equalize. When you think about it, the equalization term is pretty broad and encompasses adjusting, reviewing, and correcting licensed tax books and determining whether everyone's listed as a taxpayer and if their tax returns to the city are indeed correct. And then we also have the medical examiner's office. The medical examiner's office can perform, autopsies on deceased in the city. They often also assist law enforcement in investigations. So they're a pretty small office, but they do have a pretty large mission as well, just in terms of the services they provide along those realms. We also have the collector of revenue. Collector of revenue is responsible for collecting real estate, personal property taxes, the water bills, and the earnings and payroll taxes. As some background information, currently the earning tax is the most significant single source of general fund revenue for the city. It comprises just over a third of our city's total revenues. And receipts from individual taxpayers make up about 80% of our total earnings tax bucket, and businesses make up the remaining 20% of the earnings tax bucket. The collector's revenue is authorized under state law, it's not the city charter, but state law, to retain a portion of the collections to pay for their office's operations. And funds that are not used for operations like interest go back to the city. We also have the license collector. The license collector issues city business licenses. And there is the related, there's the related Convention and Sports Facility Trust Fund. The source of revenue for that is a tax that we levy on hotel motel room sales, and the license collector also collects that revenue on a monthly basis. SLDC, which stands for the St. Louis Development Corporation, is a private corporation that is governed by a 9-member board of directors, and it is quasi-public and offers assistance to the public and both private entities to further city economic development goals. They do work in partnership with city government, with the Board of Aldermen, with the mayor's office, and their focus is on a wide range of economic development, from jobs, housing, transportation, and infrastructure, even some education topics, environmental protection, economic opportunity, equity and inclusion. Development projects typically go through the St. Louis Development Corporation to try to figure out, okay, what can we do in the city? And it has it's a pretty broad umbrella for a lot of other organizations members in the community might be familiar with. That includes the Industrial Development Authority, the Land Clearance for Redevelopment Authority, the Land Reutilization Authority, and the Local Development Company, aka Planned Industrial Expansion Authority. So a lot of acronyms, a lot of things going on over at SLDC. And so that was, that's the high level overview of government and where to find it within city charter, and then some other entities that are operating in tandem with city government. So hopefully that gave members of the commission, the public, a bit of a better sense of both how the charter currently influences the current structure of city government, but just in general, what the structure of city government is and the various arms and operations of it. So at this point, I think what we'll do is pause for questions. I did see, Madam Chair, that Commissioner Crossland had an earlier question about what is an officer. So I can address that quickly if that's helpful, and then we can move on to other questions. The city charter does currently specify in Article 8, Section 1, that the mayor shall appoint, quote, the following officers at their convenience. And it specifies that those people include the assessor, supply commissioner, register, city councilor, city marshal, city court judges, clerk of city courts, president of the Board of Public Service, director of public utilities, director of streets, director of welfare, director of parks, recreation and forestry, director of health and hospitals, and director of public safety. So an easier way of explaining it might be to say you have officers and you have employees, and officers are typically the people who are in charge of departments and agencies.
Commissioner Crossland, does that answer your question?
It does. I think the language is somewhat arcane is the issue. One would think of officers, I think, in terms of not-for-profit corporations. Officers sometimes have ownership or holdings that are, associated with things that we might want to look at some updating there, because officer, to me at least, indicates a slightly different set of circumstances and what the charter may actually, state right now. But that's just an observation.
Okay. Do we have any other commissioners with questions regarding?
I actually have a couple that came up later, and so, but I will yield to anybody else that has questions first.
Thank you. Okay, no other questions. So Commissioner Crossland, I'll let you go, and I'll go after you.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for that review. I think it was really helpful. You can read that darn stuff, but having somebody kind of consolidate it and put it in some sort of a logical flow is really, really helpful. And I'm the kind of person that if I hear it in addition to reading it, it helps to kind of set it a little bit better in my memory banks. And so thank you very much for that. My comments, observations, etc., I think take off from what you've presented at this point. And when I think about what would help me in my role on the Charter Commission moving forward, there are at least a couple more pieces of information that would be really, really useful now based on what I've heard both from the previous presentation and the current one. The first would be, we now have a kind of sense of the structure of the organization. I would personally love to have some observations from the people in key roles or who work with the structures, et cetera, about what they think works and don't work, because it would help me to have somewhere from which to start, as opposed to just looking at the whole of the mass. And so having a better sense of what those who work with the structure on a daily basis are finding to be cumbersome, outdated, et cetera, would give us I think something to be able to, food for thought at least, and perhaps much more. The second thing that I personally would benefit from then is a better understanding of how I know that cities are evolving constantly, and their government, their structure of government is changing accordingly. We heard on Monday about peer cities. Peer cities can be, in terms of the kinds of structures that we have, the kinds of population we have, this kind of stuff. I would be very curious about what might be a grouping of peer cities, and what their structure of government might look like right now, so that we can also, I think, not because we necessarily want to change, but because it gives us some points in terms of comparison that might be useful to us in terms of discussion. And then the third thing, I thank you for that list of the county offices and stuff. I think that one of the it raises for me then this other issue that, and goes back then to the demographic discussion that we heard recently, that population is going down in the city of St. Louis. There's just no way to be able to to not see that straight in our faces. And when you talk to people, you hear it's about crime, it's about education, it's about housing, etc. And I think I asked this question the other day, and continue to want to understand how the charter has the potential to impact any of those issues. Because and that to me is a really big issue, that if we can't figure out if there are barriers, impediments, if there are incentives, opportunities within the charter that will help us to turn around what we heard is the situation in terms of population loss, then we may well end up with a city with a charter that has very few people in it, and that's not useful either. So those are just some observations and thoughts, and also some desires that I have in terms of additional information that I think would be useful in our contemplations. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Crossland. Commissioner Ingracia and Commissioner Milberg, do we have any responses to her concerns, her thoughts, or her questions?
Sure. So I can first start by tackling the first one, which is the departments, hearing from insight from departments. Completely agree. And it occurs to me that I believe it was Commissioner Hummel during the first meeting we had also expressed interest in hearing from the departments as well. As we started going through and reviewing the structure of the city charter and outlines what the departments are and their roles, we have started, our office has started apprising departmental heads. We would love to start hearing your feedback. There's going to be interest in the commission on hearing that. So that ask has been sent out. In terms of scheduling a date and time when that feedback might be available for presenting, that may be something, Madam Chair, that I may need to offline with you, Vice Chair Sheridan, Secretary Bobo, about. I don't honestly know what that timeline looks like right now, but would love to stay in touch on that, especially given the repeated interest. And yeah, I think that everyone would agree that hearing from them and the experts who are doing this day-to-day work on, okay, what's working, what's not working within the charter, what would be helpful, what's really unhelpful, is a really important piece of the work that we're doing. And then in terms of the looking into the what's going on with other cities, and what the city charter could do with population, to address population decline incentives, I would agree. I think those are important questions. Would be happy to work and support with the city council's office staff in any way that we can help dig into those pieces a little bit too. And Commissioner Grassi, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that. No, did we lose her?
No, she's here.
I think she's reconnecting right now.
Okay.
I'm back. Did I miss a question? I'm so sorry.
No problem.
My understanding was, so I apprised the commission that our office has begun to ask department heads to start identifying pieces of the city charter that, you know, work well, what maybe could be tweaked to work a little bit better. And that I know certainly I would be happy to work in support with the city councilor's office on some of the other topics of interest that were raised in terms of looking at, you know, what's happening in other cities that could be interesting models, you know, for structural governance, as well as, you know, the population decline question is really interesting. And I think it'd be interesting to know if there are measures that other cities have taken in their charters as they're reforming them to address that. So yeah, I didn't know if you had any thoughts to add on top of that.
The only thing I would add is, yeah, I'm happy to work with the commission. The board, including myself, have connections with places and other local elected officials across the country. So if there's a level of interest in bringing other speakers in who have kind of undertaken similar work more recently, I'd be happy to help with that. So keep me posted. And Director Milberg and I have talked about gathering feedback from department heads. So I would encourage the commission. I think that's a critical piece of this work, sort of the day-to-day operations and what's working well for people and what can be changed. It would be nice to have something that was a little more visionary and not something that was so very 1914, working in newer ways, better ways for us all.
Okay, in the sake of time, I'm going to ask my questions and state my thoughts and perspectives. And then I'm going to open the floor to, we have one public comment, but for me and from my perspective on listening to the presentation, the current charter reads as businesses are restructured over several years. It literally reads like a business that in the current age is being restructured. And in doing so, I would have liked to hear if the current structure is or isn't working, why or why not, and in what areas. I would also like to, I'm going to open the floor to my commissioners that are present to ask for or request a motion be passed for the Board of Aldermen to complete a presentation for us. I think it's fine that we hear from other cities and other officials, and again, other academics in their rights, but we have to hear from the people that are here, that are on the grounds doing the work in our spaces, so we can understand what needs to be done for them to be efficient and effective. In addition to updating, upgrading, renovating what needs to be done for the charter to reflect the future of the city. So I think all things will happen in due time. We'll schedule special meetings with all persons involved, all persons that should be involved. And I think it needs to involve all departments, officials, and everybody in their rights. Sorry, I'm a bit under the weather, but I do have two questions. One for Commissioner Grassi. I'll start with you. Do you know, are you aware of any current efficiencies or deficiencies for the offices that you all represented today in the presentation?
I don't feel like I can answer that question comprehensively or probably very accurately right now. And I also have to be mindful that I'm an appointee of the president of the board, so don't want to speak on her behalf without having discussed this with her before. I'm not trying to dodge the answer. I just want to make sure I'm answering thoughtfully. Okay.
Commissioner Milberg, would the same thing be in reference to you in the mayor's office?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so are the two of you able to meet with those individuals in which you report to related to efficiencies and any other ineffective deficiencies maybe document those and provide them to the city councilor's office so that they can get them to us?
Yes, absolutely. And if I can make a suggestion, since we have discussed ensuring that the departments are able to speak to similar thoughts and their perspectives as well. Perhaps we can discuss, making sure that all the information is being provided in a consistent fashion altogether. So it's not just, this piecemeal approach of, Board of Aldermen and mayor, and then we're waiting on departments, but to make sure that there's that comprehensive analytical assessment that you're referencing to deficiencies and whatnot that's provided together. So yeah, I think that's very doable.
It's also, I'd like to interject by saying that the mayor's office has already put out to the different operating departments their recommendations on changes within the charter that could make their operations run more smoothly and more efficiently. So that data is already being gathered to present to the commission, specifically by the operating departments as well.
Yeah, and it's a request. It's not recommendations. It's that was the request.
Well, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Do we
anticipate those?
Go ahead.
When do you anticipate those responses will be back from that request?
So I know earlier I mentioned that I wasn't sure. So right now that's still the case. I'm happy to ask our director of operations who, so internally in our office, our director of operations manages the day-to-day with the department. So that person would have a better understanding, and happy to speak with them and get back to the commission on what that timeline looks like for sure. I don't want to misrepresent or misstate anything.
Thank you.
Commissioner Taliata, I had the city councilor's office is working with all the departments to get and gather these reports in a streamlined fashion for us. They're going to be in our Google Drive, in which we'll have as they become available. So they'll be sent to us. So we'll have access to them once they're made available.
And do you know what the timing on that is, Madam Chair?
We don't. Once they release them or send them to the city councilor's office, we'll be notified by the staff, the commission staff.
Very good.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to quickly add that I know the president's office is working with all of the other alderpersons to try and kind of streamline how elected officials get similar information to you in terms of some of what they think is working well, what might need to be changed. And so I'll get an update on the timeline for that and report back at our next meeting if that's appropriate.
It is. I appreciate it.
Sure. I also wanted to mention, I don't know if he left, but I did get a message from our speaker, Jerry Connolly, that he had a time constraint and needed to leave.
Okay. We appreciate Jerry. We know he's going to watch this and get back to us real soon. So we don't have any other public comment, which is the next item on the agenda. So I will submit the motion to adjourn to the commission.
I so move.
Second.
Secretary Bobo, are you still present with us? I know she left and came back.
Yes, I am here.
Okay. You are in position to get our count for quorum for ending and adjourning our meeting.
Wonderful. For all of those who are in favor of adjournment, please say or raise your hand or say aye.
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 Any nays? Okay. We have received a quorum for the vote to adjourn.
Thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate you until October 4th.